Hello and welcome to the DoneJS contributors meeting. Today is Friday, January 19th, 2018. My name is Chasen Lahara, coming to you from Long Beach, California, where it is a cool 58 degrees. Today we've got some people from Batavia on the core team. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Justin from Chicago. Always buy a good swim diaper.
A pro tip.
Hey, I'm Kevin, coming to you from Downers Grove, Illinois. I got a new furnace installed yesterday, and it was 20 degrees outside, and that was not a good idea.
Congrats on the new furnace.
Thanks, I'm real excited about it.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Manuel. I'm calling from Denver, and I have no pro tip for you.
Good to see you.
I'm Matthew from Kentucky. No tip for me either, sorry.
No tip? All right, that's okay. We're going to get started by going through demos. So we'll do some demos of what we've been working on the last couple of weeks, and then we'll talk about topics after that. Matthew, do you want to get us started?
All right, we're doing demos?
Yes.
Cool. I actually just got my demo ready, so that's cool.
Perfect timing.
This is going to be a weird... No one might not understand this, but just kind of a fun bug that I think was interesting. So there's this bug where it's actually fixed now. Well, it's fixed in Major, in DoneJS 2.0. So there's this bug where like live reload would cause a zone to timeout, which I can kind of show you. I can just kind of fiddle, do some stuff that causes a live reload, and wait a second. And there we go, we get a timeout. So what's happening is every time you make a change to your file, live reload re-renders the application. Done auto render, like it done auto render listens for when things change, and it just re-renders your application when that happens. And that's how live reload. You know, live reload reloads everything, obviously, and then it has an API which I can show you real quick, which you can use. Module replacement. By the way, these very nice new guides for stuff. This is about using live reload, but it gives you a link to linked here. And this is the API, is that you import live reload, and you can provide a callback, and this will get called back every time a live reload cycle completes. And there's some more advanced stuff that you can do with this as well. You can listen to when the module gets disposed of, when it's actually torn down. So there's a lot of stuff you do. Done on a render implements all of this so that it basically does this part, and it does a few other things. So anyways, that's how live reload works. The bug's happening is that for some reason when re-rendering occurs, it is causing the second time it renders, you know, done on render renders everything inside of a zone, and that zone is timing out. So recently we added can zone timeouts and debugging information to done auto render, and that's why you get all these warnings, which help you kind of figure out what's going on, like why is this thing timing out. So some of this is caused. Some of these errors are caused by, you know, other stuff happening. So basically, we have this thing that's timing out, which causes a promise to time out, which causes this, and so you get kind of a snowball effect there. So usually you look at like the bottom one, and that tells you where the actual problem is. So I could see here that, you know, we have this can connect constructors store has a decrement function, and this one's timing out for some reason. So if you look at this function, you know, I'll bring it up in an editor. Can everyone hear me okay, by the way? See?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay. Sometimes I wonder if you know, I went offline or something.
No, you're good.
Yeah, so here's the actual code. Now I've just been adding some debugging information in here, but so forget about these functions. These are just for my debugging. But what you get here is you have can constructor store. It has this increment and decrement function. Now I don't know. I mean, I kind of have an idea of why they exist, but I don't fully know. I didn't really care to figure it out. I just know that whenever decrement is called, we do a set timeout. And we keep that timeout. Whenever an increment happens, we clear the timeout.
If you want a quick explanation, I can
Sure. Go ahead.
So what it's for is that when you, let's just say, So can connect by default only keeps things in the store when they're bound. But a lot of times people will do these things with promises where they'll say, go get this data and go get this data. And when they're both done, I want to like do something with the data, and then I'm going to render it into the page, and then it's going to be bound. So while requests are going out, if something comes back and there's still like a pending get one or find get list request, we will still keep everything in the store as long as there's kind of outgoing requests. So that's why it's counting requests when they come back and forth.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so what you see happening here. So this is the one that's not finishing, or or we think it's not finishing. So we see here is a simple set timeout. We save this timer kind of in this global closure here, and it's only a 10 millisecond timeout, so it's super short. And then we clear it here. So there's actually, just looking at this code, there's nothing wrong with this code. The timeout's super short, so even if the timeout occurred, it's only going to delay things by 10 milliseconds. That should not cause the zone to not complete. And then if it gets cleared, that's okay too, because we keep track of all of these timer IDs, and we know, if you clear one, we know we don't need to wait on this set timeout anymore because it got cleared. So all that's implemented in CanZone. So there's nothing wrong with this code. So I was like, it kind of puzzled here. So I created this log zone function just kind of here, and all this does is you give it like a little tag, and then it's going to log. What is it going to log? It's going to log the current timer ID, and it's also going to log. It's gonna like keep track of what zones are running. So every zone when DoneAutoRender creates two zones actually. So there's a zone within a zone. So a zone has a parent. So that there could possibly be, there's either going to be one or two zones running. So I gave these zones an ID just so I can know which zone is which. And so I'm just going to log all that information. So let me start up this, restart the page, and we should see this stuff log. So what we see happen is first a timeout is cleared, and we actually don't have a timer ID here, so we actually clear it first. So this is okay. We just kind of ignore this. Nothing really happens here. And then we see that there's a set timeout followed by this is never cleared. Instead, its callback is called. So the actual callback here is called. So we're okay. Right now we're just fine. Everything's okay. Then if I twiddle with some stuff and cause a live reload, we're going to see things blow up here. It blows up. So now if we look at this log information, this is like how I figured out that something strange was going on. So what we see here is we get a clear timeout, kind of the same up here. We get a clear timeout of 11. It's weird that it's the same number, actually. Maybe I might have made a mistake there. Oh no, it's clearing the old one. That's what it is. This 11 is still within the scope, so that gets cleared even though the callback was already called. So it's kind of nothing's really happening here. Then we get a set timeout. The set timeout is 31. The zone is 3, and it has a parent zone of 4. So that's key. And then we get a clear timeout of 31, so 31 gets cleared, but its zone ID is 5. So that's where things have gone bad. Is that we're clearing 31.
Since we're talking about zones, would you say you're in the danger zone?
Yeah, we're in. Well, yeah, there's too many zones. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. So yeah, the 31 is cleared by the wrong zone. So this zone 3, never gets informed that 31 is done. So we never know that 31's done. So everything blows up. So the actual root cause here, and I don't know if I can trace. I'm not gonna try, but I kind of traced this back, and what I found out was that DoneAutoRender has it renders twice. So like your index.stash file. Whenever the index.stash file changes, so anytime you make a change to any file, it reloads all the parent modules, so kind of recursively finds all the parents and reloads everything. So that means anytime you make a change, since index.stash is your main, that this actually gets changed as well, which means it gets reloaded. And whenever index.stash finishes loading, it calls this reattach with zone, which sets up the zones and does the rendering. And then also done auto render has this thing. Where is it? It has its own like live reload stuff, where anytime a live reload cycle is finished, it calls render and attach. So it re-renders as well. So we get two renders happening kind of almost at the same time. So a set timeout occurs with zone 3. 10 milliseconds have not passed yet, and a new zone is created, and it clears that timeout because this is within the global scope. Whew, that was a mouthful. So the fix was for me to change this so that I listen to whenever the main module, which is index.stash, gets broken down, and because I know that's going to be reloaded, I don't do this render here. So we only get one render to occur, and then everything works. Sorry, I took a long time. I just thought that was kind of a fun bug. Whenever you get like a race condition in the danger zone, it's kind of cool. So,
I liked it. Thanks, Matthew.
All right. Yep, no problem.
Manuel, do you have a demo for us?
I do have. I've been working over the last couple of weeks of different issues across some repos. So my demos will be all over the place.
Sounds good.
Cool. So the first one that I wanted to show is that this actually, I worked on this yesterday.
Sorry to interrupt you already. Would you mind bumping up the text size of any stuff you actually want us to be able to read?
Okay. Let me know if you can read that.
That is much better. Thank you.
Okay. So what you're seeing in my editor right now is the output of the optimized build. And before my change, this comment you see here, which is the module name, wasn't present. One of the reasons I wanted to add this is because I spent some time debugging this code. And with the numeric module IDs, it's really hard to know the source of the module you are debugging. So what I did was if we go back to the browser, this is transpile, and transpile is a module that Steel Tool uses to, transpile modules. And the Slim logic uses ES template, which is a module that uses template-like Lodashes, and it generates an AST. And what I did was to change the template we had before, so now it includes the module name as a comment, and that's what you get in the output. That was my first demo, and the other one that I worked was there was an issue. This is Big Docs, and this is the module we use to generate the documentation of our packages. And there was a feature to make the demos scale themselves to fit the content. But I noticed there was an issue where if you notice, the height is being decreased continuously. And let me show you the code. And basically, this is pretty much the same code that was before, but what I did to fix it, it's basically just created like some range. So if the height is within that range, we don't set it again. And if you happen to know how to measure the height of an iframe, that would be cool, because I didn't find any reliable way to do it. And my last demo would be something that I've been demoed like a couple of times already. And what I did this time, this is CanDebug, and we expose a new function which is called drawGraph that takes the same arguments as log what changes me, and what it does is to create a new window and draws a dependency graph in there. Let me show you that. I'm gonna refresh this page, which executes the code you're seeing here, and now we have the dependency graph. And let me try to make this actually. I think I can make it. Yeah. And now we have the dependency graph of the code, and you can put it side by side and compare what's going on. And that's it for me. If you have questions?
It's awesome. Thanks, Manuel.
That's really cool.
Cool. Kevin, do you have things to demo?
Yep, I do. Let me share my screen. You guys see that okay?
Yep, thank you.
All right, so people have probably seen this clock demo before. This is just a clock using Canvas. There's this analog clock and then, digital clock and then the analog clock down here with Canvas. It's a pretty typical Kane component, but the thing that I've been working on is what we're calling auto mounting. So the difference is here in the HTML, we can see we just have this clock controls component here in the page in our HTML, instead of having to like create a stash template with this tag and then create a fragment by calling a template and then appending that to the page. You don't have to do any of that anymore. Now you can just use your components like elements. I'm going to show a little bit about how this is working. So we can see here in the console, you can do a custom elements dot get. What is this thing called? Clock. We can actually see that our clock controls is actually registered in the custom elements registry, which is basically this thing. Anything that's using CanView callbacks, which is what Can component is using under the hood, is now being registered as a web component or custom element. In browsers that support that. So over here in Firefox, we've got the same code working, same demo, same HTML is working, but people that actually don't know how to switch the console. Anyway, Firefox doesn't support custom elements, so this is working completely differently. It's actually creating a mutation observer that's checking for when new elements are added to the page and calling the tags manually. We're kind of polyfilling custom elements to make this work, but it works the same. You can use your components like regular elements. That's it.
Awesome.
Yeah, just quick comment, Kevin. I started thinking, I wonder if auto mount should be its own package or something. It kind of abstracts away the difference between custom elements and browsers that don't support custom elements. Like, is there a use case for auto mount outside of CanView callbacks? I don't know the answer. That's just a quick comment.
Yeah, that's a good question. Justin and I kind of talked about where this would go, and we thought CanView callbacks made the most sense since it's the place for creating tags. But yeah, we could maybe move that code out if we find another use for it. But yeah, like you said, I can't really think of another use case for it other than tags, which is what we have.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. Justin, do you have anything to present?
Yeah. So, Kevin, can you pull up your JS bin again? And scroll down to the bottom, or that value. There we go. Now, two things. So this is what I'm going to demo. And one thing I realized is this is not actually working. We should show, you inspired me. I just created an issue when I saw this, that we should warn people if they create a property that will have resolve called on it after it would have been torn down, because this isn't clearing the interval. So
yeah.
To fix that problem, what Kevin, well, let's talk about what this value does, right? So in define map now, there is a value, there was value before, which you could define like a default value. Now, if you want a default value in 4.0, you can do it. You can still use value, but it'll warn you. It'll say use the new default property. Value now is a function that's called with kind of a, you can think of it as like property options with a bunch of different methods that allow you to resolve the new value of whatever that property should be. And this is very much something like streams. So this clock controls view model, it's going to have basically what Kevin has set up is he wants the time property to every second be a new date. So the way he did that is he got the resolve function from that object that's passed to the value callback, essentially. And he's calling resolve every second with a new value. Calls it right away, and then sets an interval up. And the only other thing, and I don't know if you can add this for me, Kevin, we can pair program this in real time, would be to return a function here that's going to clear the interval returned by set interval. You have to return it as a function, but you could do dot. Yeah, you could do dot bind and then do the arguments thing, and that would create a function with the right arguments if you want to get really crazy. But or you could do that. So yeah, this is and then this value callback that kind of defines the behavior of your property. If it returns a function when there are no more listeners to what the time property is, that callback function will be called.
But if you're using like listen to, that will be automatically torn down.
Those will be automatically torn down. So I just wanted to, my demo, I'm gonna actually kind of go through its docs and talk more about it. But I was just, because Kevin showed it, I love smooth, seamless transitions, and now we can go into mine. Yeah. So hey, Julian, how's it going?
Hey, everybody.
It's good to see you. All right, so I was about to talk about this new value behavior of can define. And so what this is it really provides a lot of the benefits of streams to CanJS without having to bite off a whole streaming library like can define stream Kefir provides. Well, then you have this whole other streaming library that you have to learn. This provides all the same benefits of streams in terms of the ability to define complex property behaviors based off of other events, but it does it with needing to really only know like 4 or 5 APIs instead of a whole streaming library. Now, streaming library does provide a lot of ways of doing transformations of events to other values, where this really you can only call resolve, but you should be able to pretty much articulate any property behavior now. So I'm pretty happy with this so far. So let's go through it. So really where you would want to use these value definitions is where you cannot use a computed getter. For example, if you were using a setter before, and in your setter you were changing other properties, you should start using this value definition. So one thing, for example, might be you want to count how every time the name property is changed. In 3.0, you would have created a setter, and then in that setter for name, you would have just changed the name change count. Now, the problems with doing that is really you have trouble seeing, if you wanted to see where like name change count can actually be adjusted, you'd have to kind of be omnipotent with the rest of your code. You'd have to see where that could come in from, where other properties or functions might be changing it. The idea behind this in streams is that you have a single place that defines how your value is compiled. So what I would do is I would say there's a name change count property. I can call this prop resolve. So this gets called with a object of methods used to essentially define the behavior of this property. The two most common ones you'll use are prop listen to, which allows you to listen to when some other event happens on your object. So I want to listen to when the name event happens on a person. And when that happens, I want to increment count and set name change count to whatever the incremented count is. And then I also want to make sure I provide an instantaneous value. So if someone were to just read name change count, they could get 0 as an instantaneous value. That works. So that's any questions there before I go into a little bit more depth? Especially maybe from Julian, because everybody else is so familiar with it here, I think.
Nope, go ahead.
All right. So like I said, there's a few different functions on this prop object. There's resolve, and whenever prop resolve call is called, that is essentially setting the value of name change count. There's prop listen to, which works like if you've ever used Backbone's listen to. CanJS has this listen to for a long time as well, but it's not really featured. This is essentially a way of listening to something, but all the listeners are recorded and then can be unbound automatically. So notice here we didn't have to return a function to tear down this binding to unbind. That's because anything bound to with listen to is automatically torn down. You don't have to worry about it. And there's just a bunch of different ways of like you can listen to things on your map instance, or you can listen to things on other instances. And the other nice thing about this is it all happens during, all handlers are called back during the notify queue. So that, let's say for some reason, I think I talked to, maybe I don't talk about it in here. I mentioned it somewhere. Or maybe it's just in the tests. The nice thing about it, all these handlers firing off in the notify queue, is that if you called resolve twice, that's okay. It's still only going to emit one value because it essentially registers the actual dispatching of events in the derive queue. So you're not going to get, like, if you're having to listen a whole bunch and resolve a whole bunch, that's actually all right. Everybody, the outside world is only going to see one value be emitted. So that's a really good thing about listen to. Stop listening is just like listen to, but does the opposite, but it allows you to kind of like what jQuery offered is you can, if you want to stop listening to everything registered to listen to, well, you can just call stop listening. If you want to listen to just one property or just one object, you can do all of these kind of fancy calls that make it easier to remove handlers. The final thing is, oh, I forgot to update the docs here, is it gets called with a property.lastSet. And that is an observable that was the last set value. I think I show an example. Maybe this isn't the latest docs that we're looking at right now. I probably need to update mine. But this essentially allows you to, actually, I think I know where those docs are. Okay. Last set allows you to, is basically you can think of it as like a compute that gets, it's a single value observable that is whatever someone set, in this case, city to last. And you can listen to essentially when someone's setting city, or you can read the last set value and resolve with that. So this is another example showing kind of the city state selector that people might be familiar with. Here I have a locator, and what I want is to be able to create the locator with a state and city, but if I ever change the state, the city should become null. So the imperative way of doing this would be to have a setter that sets city to null. Okay, but the problem again is I'd have to be omnipotent and know, if I wanted to figure out where city is set from, I'd have to like look everywhere in the universe potentially for that to happen. So what you do with the value behavior is, what I want to do is anytime last is set, so that anytime city is set, I just want to take that value, whatever it is. But then I can listen to when state is set and resolve my property to null, so city will become null. And then if I want an initial value, I just take whatever someone set city to and say that that's the value that I want. So obviously there's like more to write than this, clearly, but it's, I don't know, I can look in one place now for how city works. And I think if you understand the basics of CanJS, especially if you're coming from CanJS or you've been using it for years, I think this is pretty nice because you're used to listening to properties and kind of trying to update values, but this formalizes it in a way that's very similar to functional reactive programming. Well, it basically is the same thing. So that's it from me. Any questions, thoughts about this?
Is this available as like its own type of observable?
Yes, it is. So so we haven't really documented these, and I don't know if we're going to for 4.0, but there is a can simple observable, and these are like if you know in 3.0 can compute had a million different signatures, but it was kind of a mess to like make all of these different signatures work within one object. Now what we've done is we've got this can simple observable that just has a whole bunch of different independent observables. And this one that we were just looking at is resolver. And it is implemented here. And yeah, it can be, done on its own, essentially. And then essentially what happens is can define can mix in a resolver observable that is used to represent a property. So when you read the city property, what you're actually doing is reading a resolver observable or setting a resolver observable under the hood. And the nice thing about this is now we're getting to something that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't think we'd have time, so I'm just going to do it anyways now, is can observe. I just created an issue about can observe on how we can use decorators to mix in these observables, mixing in observable-based decorators, right? Because what I want is that result. We call it resolver, right? That's what we call as a resolver observable. At least that's what I called it. It's the value property in can define, but I called it a resolver observable because that's what it's really doing. What I want to be able to do is on can observe decorate in a resolver like this, and this essentially is going to build a resolver observable for every single instance and then wire up instances of this view model's get and set to essentially call that instance of a resolver observable. And we have other ones like async that would work the same way. Getters are already doing this. So that's
cool.
Plan. Cool.
Sweet. Thanks, Justin. I am going to demo next. Okay, cool. So I've been working on a client project, but I did 2 open source related things these past couple of weeks. The first of which was we had a DoneJS LA on Tuesday. I really like the DoneJS meetups that we do because we go from nothing to building an example app, and a lot of them have like a nice little design, and it feels like you really accomplished something, and you're learning about, in this case, the basics of CanJS and using Yahoo's Weather API. So that was on Tuesday, hosting these about every 5 or 6 weeks, and hosted by Codesmith. So shout out to them for hosting us. And then I hosted a usability study last Friday. I had 2 people come in, and just to give a little bit of info about what this is. We think it's really valuable to have people who haven't used CanJS before to check out the site and give it a go and see what their first impressions are, and kind of what resonates well with them and what they have a hard time with. So I had 2 people come in last Friday and just had them explore the site for maybe half an hour and get some specific feedback on some of the pages. And then instead of having them go through one of our guides, I just asked them to build an application with CanJS, gave them an API endpoint from which to fetch data, and then show this data with CanJS. So it was super insightful. So I want to try and quickly go through a bunch of issues that I opened that were kind of from the roadblocks and things that they ran into. I'm going to try and go through these as quickly as possible. So if people want to interject, please just interject. And I'm going to go roughly by priority. So the first one, create can define list and can define map. right now you require these in the can define module. And it's the first thing, like when you go to canjs.com, can define is the first package that's shown, even though it's more like people are really using can define list and can define map more. So for 4.0, we want to land can define list and can define map packages, move can define to infrastructure. So it's not the first thing that you see. And then we want to do this across all of our repos. So we'll write a code mod to make it easy. Another thing that's come up pretty frequently is when people are on one of the pages, they don't necessarily see the on this page in the black bar or this this little table of contents that's embedded in each of the pages that has multiple sections. This in particular came up on the setting up CanJS page where people didn't necessarily see that you could use Steal or Webpack or Browserify or whatever. So we're going to change the design of this to kind of bring the table of contents, make it more easily seen. Also on the setting up CanJS page, sometimes people just want to clone a GitHub repo and have the packages set up and what have you. So we want to create repos that serve an example for how you can get started with CanJS and add those to the setting up page. Then maybe include a simple example of, here's how you create a component. And with the auto mounts, you can just, like Kevin showed, you can just have that in the page. So show like a really easy way. Here's how you can set up a really simple CanJS app. One thing that came up kind of across both sessions is people not necessarily walking away with a strong idea of what sets CanJS apart and why they would want to use CanJS in an application or for an application. So our technical highlights page goes through all of the nitty-gritty details of what sets CanJS apart. I think it'll be served better by having a short introduction that kind of gives the highlights so people can immediately be engaged by those instead of just the table of contents that's at the top of the page right now. And related to that, we need to show those same points, or we should show those same points on our homepage so people are more immediately engaged with why they should care about CanJS and go to the, look at the rest of the pages. There's a new technology overview page in the 4.0 site. I think it is really, really good, and there's a couple of things that we need to fix. But overall, I think it is one of the best pages that we have that serves as an introduction to kind of all of the different parts of CanJS. Make the demos load in a more performant way, because when you go to a page like the technology overview that has a bunch of different demos, it probably has a dozen demos. All of those are being loaded with Steal. So every single module is being loaded individually, which means there's literally on that page thousands of HTTP requests and tens of megabytes of code that are downloaded. So Steal has a cool dev bundles feature that can bundle all of that together. So if we use something like that for the demos, it'll make the pages more performant. This is a bug just on the CanJS site. Sometimes if you search for something using the search feature in your browser, like Chrome, and you are typing and you start going through the results, the search feature will disappear as you're going to different sections. So we want to fix that bug. On the so in the CanStash docs, I can type CanStash. In the CanStash docs, we make mention of using Steal Stash to import templates, which is super useful if you're using Steal. Doesn't give a lot of information for people who want to use Webpack or something like that. And we have a template acquisition page that kind of explains how you can load things. So I want to expand this module loader section to talk about Steal and Webpack and Browserify. We have all of that information in the setting up CanJS page. It would just be useful to have here as well. and then call out Steal and Webpack here. I think that would be useful. This is something I'm not sure about, because in the user studies, people were not getting autocomplete suggestions in their code editor. But I know it works for some people. So it would be helpful to know, helpful to investigate why this is working for some people and why it's not. These two issues use consulet and example code and the ES6 import syntax. A little bit of controversy in this, but one of the main takeaways from at least one of the people who participated in the user study was that because all of our code examples were using var and using require.js's require syntax, or sorry, CommonJS's require syntax, it made CanJS look antiquated to them, like we weren't following best practices from the community and that sort of thing. So I know someone already, I think Greg already opened a PR to show import statements in our example code, and we're interested in using constant let as well too. So shout out to Greg for making the code mod for that. On the homepage, we want to bring it to life a little bit more. So we have colored versions of the hare and tortoise images. So that's a really easy contribution if someone wants to update that. Right now, our highlighting for our like JavaScript code examples is not as lively, which sounds like it's just like a really small issue, but it comes down to usability and being able to read longer code examples. So there's an issue open for kind of making the code that we render in the site prettier. Another thing that's a little bit confusing to new users is how we encourage, we say, like, if you're creating a define map and you call extend, we always want you to like label what the define map is so we can name that constructor function and show that to you when you're debugging, which is super helpful. But it's confusing to new users because it's like, okay, what is that argument? Usually what we do is we make it match the variable name, so they're not sure if that's a requirement or not. So in our like introductory guides, I think it'd be useful for us to not have that first argument. And then the last one, this is just a starting point for conversation to talk about whether or not we, or how we teach CanJS. In a lot of our guides, we show the can package with JS bins as the like getting started way of using CanJS, which creates confusion when we recommend that people use the individual like can component, can route, can define packages. So this is kind of a starting point for us to have a conversation about how we want to teach CanJS and talk about some different ideas around that. That is everything that I wanted to go through. Any questions, comments? Nope. Cool. No one had said anything, so I was almost afraid that I had lost you guys. Okay, cool. I think we can move to topics now. Did anyone have anything that they wanted to talk about? Maybe Justin, how to test auto-mounted and connected callback components?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I think offline we did get to the point where we at least knew the problem that we have to figure out. So in 4.0, as Kevin was showing, we now have the ability where you can just append an element to the page, and through mutation observers or through custom elements, if we see that matches a component, we will add its behavior. Now, it won't work with view model bindings, but as long as it's got its own view model and it's kind of like a self-contained component, everything should just work. except that everything's going to kind of be mounted asynchronously. And that creates a testing problem that we're going to have to figure out what to do about.
So sometimes it's going to be mounted asynchronously.
I think we should. Okay, so when we were talking about this originally, I was thinking we should always just even force a set timeout if someone's using custom elements.
Custom.
Just because it's consistent, right? Or what? I don't know. Maybe
it won't be if it goes through stash. It won't be async.
Yes, it will. Well, the connected callback will be async because that still runs through mutation observers.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, it currently would be for custom elements, but anyways, yeah, I guess it depends on what you're testing. So I'm just thinking about how most people test elements. Is I don't know. Every time I've used it, it's been like funky in there or something like that, where you're already doing stuff asynchronously for the most part.
Yeah. So like the project that I'm working on right now, it's a lot of getting a reference to a stash template, rendering it, and inside of it is a component, and not using func unit or anything like that.
But even if you're not using, so if you're testing, if you're using the connected callback at all in your view model, you have to have an element, right, to call it. Right.
Depends what you're doing. Are you like triggering events on the element?
So if you think about the example I was showing the canvas clock, that value, or I guess not, we could have done the value thing using connected callback. So if you were setting up a timeout or something in your connected callback and setting a property on your view model in connected callback, doing anything to the view model in the connected callback is going to be a problem, or is going to be something that's difficult to test right now, right?
Right now, yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, what should we do about that? Right. I mean, to me, there's the problem is really in an ideal world. If we had like a whole bunch more time, maybe what we just go is like the Polymer route and just see if we can punch our environment such that we can essentially, or like we force DOM mutate use, where we're going to go synchronous again. I think there's a lot of appeal to being able to write synchronous tests, right? And we aren't going to support that probably.
So I kind of disagree. I don't think I don't know what I guess I don't understand what you would be testing that shouldn't work, because you should be able to create an element and start doing stuff to that element. Like just think about any normal element.
So yeah, but that's exactly like that, but that's what people would want is I want to be able to do something like I want to be able to do something like element. And I would not be able to do, like let's just say my area, like my my, not can fixture, but like my fixture in my DOM area, and I append an element. Well, I cannot just start doing like element, I couldn't just do an inner HTML, and just verify that equals what my view was. Right? This wouldn't even have a view model, and like, how do you get the view model from it? Right? Like, how do you set it to have some data? Like, you can't until after it's been mounted, which is going to happen asynchronously.
Only for the mutation observer case.
Yeah, which is like most browsers right now.
It's 50% of browsers.
Yeah, it's half.
Okay.
Are we talking about like half the users' browsers, or do we mean half? Because it's like Firefox doesn't have it, IE doesn't have it. Does Safari have it?
Safari has it. Okay. So if we're talking about users, we're probably talking about over 50%.
Over 50%.
Safari and Chrome are by far.
Enough so like I think most people are going to want or be supporting browsers that.
Yeah, you're supporting browsers.
Yeah, so your test. Sure. Yeah, so I think the problem.
Everyone supports Firefox.
Yeah,
Right.
we can support Firefox. So I think it's a problem. I'll put it that way. It's a problem that we have to
Yeah,
solve.
I think making CanJS worse for a legacy need is not a good idea, though. So I would definitely favor like some type of callback.
So let me show the way that we're testing this in Canvy callbacks. So if we keep the possibly asynchronous behavior that we have now, this is something that we could provide. Is we basically have this is doing that exactly what you were talking about in your callback, which like this could be in your connected callback or whatever. You're setting the HTML. In order to test this, we have to create the thing, append it to the QUnit fixture or whatever, append it to your page, and then it runs this after mutation helper to make sure that all mutation observer events have fired. And what this basically does is this creates a thing and uses DoneMutate to listen for this to be appended with a mutation observer. So it's basically waiting for a mutation to happen.
Yeah.
So we could provide something like this, some sort of test utility to make this easier for people to use if we want to keep the current possibly asynchronous behavior we have.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's an alternative, which is like a synchronous like forcing of what DoneMutate would do. Like another way we could do it is because if we want to set ourselves up, like another way we could do it is you append and then you call like view callbacks, like do your mounting, not call that obviously, and then you could if you just did that, you can do it on the whole document. You could do it like on just the element, and then this way, the nice thing about this is you only write this if you want to support Firefox or whatever, and then you know what I mean. Like you don't have to. You don't have, and you don't have. You can still have your like test be synchronous. We just give them a method that's essentially going to like do mounting synchronously, and they have to call that. I mean, heck, it could even we could even just have a like view callbacks like create element that gives you your mounted element. Now, a pen child isn't. There's still going to be asynchronous stuff if they're using the inserted callbacks or they're using connected callback, which is kind of another. In some ways, there's really like two places that are problems. There's like instantiation, right? Like creation, and then there's like insertion, right? And ideally, both of these we would be able to like do things synchronously and tell people stuff has happened synchronously. Maybe what we should be doing is maybe again this is 5.0 but it's nice if we have we kind of have what's because definitely by 5.0 with can element like. Both of these things, you said that this happens, I think, Matthew, synchronously. Connected call get back, it's called synchronously in a custom element, right?
Yeah, the constructor gets called when you call create element, and then the other will be called when you insert.
I mean, that's the ideal world, right? This is what we really would want. Now, we can't provide that because we're using mutation observers. But what we might be able to do is, I wonder if we could, or maybe this is called through DoneMutate or something. I don't know. It's like maybe we can give people APIs that are going to be synchronous. So, hey, you want to test this so that it's going to look synchronous in both? Well, then you're going to use like view callbacks, create element, and then you're going to use DoneMutate. And even though DoneMutate doesn't fire synchronously, I don't know. I'm throwing out ideas here to make it so that, like, in an ideal world, hey, you only right now, you know what? You're building an app that, like, you don't really care. You just want to support Chrome, and when Firefox catches up, like, then you're all right working. And then the nice thing is we can delete a whole bunch of code also for our stuff. It's like, okay, fine. Then you just do that, and then you just append child, and you're off to the races. And if you're not that, well, then you can call, like, you know, some special methods that are going to do it synchronously for you.
Even if it doesn't happen synchronously for you, being able to have a callback called or listen for an event when, you know, after something's been, after the inserted events have run or a connected callback or whatever, I feel like that would work too.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I don't know what most people prefer. I kind of prefer the callback approach just because I don't have. I feel like this other way, I have to think a little bit too much about what's happening. You know, like I have to think about that. Oh, when my element is called, then I want. I actually don't know what callbacks does. Does callback? Does it start? It starts. Rendering a template. It does everything like at one time, right?
No, connected call. No, during instantiation, the template is the view model is created. The template is rendered.
Rendered, yeah, like in the constructor part, yeah.
Constructor part during creation, and then insertion is really the connected callback. Because a lot of times that's when you want to be doing stuff like getting your elements with, right? You can't really do that till you're in the page. So that's why you really have these two. These are two important lifecycle timings, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, you'd want to render the template in the insertion as well.
Why? No, you wouldn't. You definitely want to render that. It's faster if you render during when it's not part of the DOM. You're making mutations, things like that aren't part of the connected DOM. So you're not gonna have to, like, you know.
But it's not effectual though. Like, you can trigger XHR requests by creating a component. So it's like you can't just, like, you know what I mean, you can't just like create elements and throw them away. It's easily, but anyways, I think.
Well, I mean, for performance reasons, you want to do. You don't want to, like, when the element's inserted, draw then a whole bunch more DOM inside of it. It's faster to be building everything disconnected and then get it inserted at once.
Maybe, but well, I don't know if that's true.
No, that's definitely true, because I mean, think about, like, there's a million demos of, like, put an element in the page, put a div in the page, then append a child to that div, then append another child to that div, then append another child to that div that's all on the page. It's got to reflow every single time, versus if you just appended a billion divs to each other and then appended that one div all at once, then there's only one repaint, one reflow. All of that stuff is much faster.
Yeah, that's true. Anyways, it's not, I don't think it's good because there shouldn't be no side effects by creating an element. Just as there are no side effects by creating, you know, built-in elements.
Sure, but that's a different, like, there's side effect. I mean, what do you consider a side effect? Like, one element creating its children elements? I don't think they're really
creating a view model triggers, like, XHR requests.
It can, yeah. It depends. Yeah, so there's different levels of side effects. You're right. I think that ideally the going and making requests would happen during insertion, but creating all of that sub-DOM should happen during creation.
Yeah, as long as that sub-DOM doesn't, like, have side effects.
Yeah. Okay, anyways.
So, real quick, CanView callbacks does all of this on the connected callback. So it doesn't, it calls the callback on inserted for auto-mounted elements.
Right. Because it kind of has to, because you don't know when you're created for the mutation observer case.
Could there just be a view callbacks, like, mount stuff? Because to me, I mean, the reason why I want to do it synchronous is because that's how I would want to write it if I was, like, that's how people are going to expect to write it with custom elements. Is they'll just create their element, append it, and then they should be able to. The next thing that we have to deal with also, there's a final thing, which is, like, getting the VM, which is kind of a problem, which we have view model. But anywho, what I would want to be able to do then, especially with like can element, is then be just like can element like, well, now the name is Justin, and then I would be like the element.html is inner HTML. It says like h1 Justin figured out testing. Right? Like I want to be able to write something like this. So to me, yeah, I guess it's not that big of a difference to put it in like a when ready sort of callback versus just being able to do it.
My point before we got off track there was that I prefer what you just typed now is because the other way you have to there's like two things that happen. There's creation and insertion. You have to know when they happen, and maybe there's a different view callbacks method to do the creation part, but not the insertion part. And I just feel like I have to like think more. That was my point.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to only have one new thing to learn, and that would be this like when ready function, instead of having to learn what different functions I need to use to create elements into them.
In both, you could still do a do everything function that is going to make sure it's fully mounted. It's going to like synchronous make sure it's created and mounted and inserted.
You could.
Right. Yeah.
I think conceptually it's going to be easier to teach. Here's a callback for when everything is done versus here's a function call for making everything happen. If that makes sense. So I also prefer the kind of callback after creation and
I think this is going to be harder. I think this way is actually going to work better. But syntactically, it doesn't matter. You could still make this, then just do it, and then call a function back. The reason is because, I don't know, I just feel like we've had weird isms happen with the trick that we use to know when mutation observers is required. Like, because what you're really going to need to do it right is make that sure that this mutation observer is the last mutation observer handler to be called. And that's tricky unless you're adding stuff to your mutation observers that definitively there's different places to register these kind of handlers. So that's but that doesn't really matter. Syntactically, is how it works is different than how do you use it. Anywho, the final thing then to discuss is just then how are we going to get the view models off of this? I mean, I guess we could just call it like give it to the person.
Well, you couldn't do that, right? What if you have multiple?
Yeah, that's true. How do you get the one? Yeah. You said to use can view model, then to get it.
I mean, yeah, with can element, it will be the element, but with component, I don't see another way. Unless people were in favor of adding a view model prop or something.
So Chris and I talked about that when he was working out. We went with the symbol because I felt it was the safest thing, but we could also have a prop. You could just do, element view model. I mean, maybe we should just do that.
Was there any, like, you said it's safer not to do that. Do you know of any problems that would cause, or is it just
no? I just thought, well,
apprehension?
Something else has a view. I mean, symbols you're guaranteed never to conflict, right? So,
I don't love that personally, just because I feel like I'm exposing my internal implementation to the world. I don't feel strongly about it, but I don't like it.
Anyways, well, I would say that, Kevin, this gives you enough to probably write up an issue with some ideas.
Mm-hmm.
The pitfalls. Yeah. I mean, I guess my concern is, I guess in the end, it's not too bad if people then like, okay, well, now we're finally in browsers. All the browsers support this. We can just uncomment this callback. You gotta uncomment. You gotta like hit it 2 places, and then hit Shift Tab. Right? You gotta delete 2 lines and Shift Tab, where mine is just like delete a line.
I think it depends on what you're doing. Because if you're like checking the elements, well, if you're checking with the element render, it might eventually render inside of a request animation frame anyways. So I think you're always going to, you're doing that kind of thing.
Sure, if you're doing that kind of thing. But I think that I think it's what people really want. I mean, I remember it was the Vue meetup. It was like very nice for them. They just kind of like inserted their elements. And maybe they did have some kind of, I think they did have some kind of like callback to do probably similar things to this. It's like you just want to, I mean, part of it is even like this. I'd almost want the Vue model now, because one thing is, how are we going to simulate? One other thing to think about is like, how do we simulate Vue model bindings, right? The initialization that happens before the element is actually inserted, right? Because the Vue model bindings come before the template is actually rendered. And there's no good way right now of, even with this, of getting in there and having, like, this will be a problem with, I say this. This will be a problem even with custom elements, because what we would want is to say, like, well, maybe it had to have, especially if we want to support the required property in the future. Let's say my element, it had to have a name property. Like, is this basically, are we going to make this kind of required impossible? Because how do you, if you want to actually like custom DOM elements, do you kind of force yourself to make custom elements impossible because you can't, like?
That's why you can't do it very much. That's why the constructor is just not very useful.
Yeah, you have to be by,
people add properties at any point and all that. Yeah,
so maybe what we'd want is somehow our Vue models really need to have this happen during the before insertion. That's when things become required, but that's when you definitely want to render before then for the performance reasons I talked about. I don't know. It's kind of hairy.
What's the performance reason?
Okay, like, again, so just create a div and then append that to the child, and then create like 100 other divs, one after the other, that are appended inside of this div. Or conversely, create a div and then append 100 things to it, and then append that original div into the DOM, and you'll see a dramatic performance difference.
Yeah, but we don't ever do the first way. So we always render into a fragment and then insert the fragment.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. The view.
So whether you do that in connected or in the constructor is the same, right? It's the difference.
Sorry, let me take a step back. So here's the flow that can component goes through, right? There's like essentially the element already exists, right? And then what it does is it creates a new Vue model with the bindings data. And then it renders its view with the Vue model, and then it chills out until insertion, and then it calls the connected callback on the Vue model. Right? That's what it does. Now the problem is the DOM, you like create the element. Now there's not like a, what you really want to be able to do is like kind of set up your bindings then. Like what you really want to be able to do is create your element. Then you'd want to be able to kind of do the binding step. And then I've been watching a lot of Lord of the Rings, so that's why ages can be a little bit higher. And then extended edition is so long. Jeez, I forgot. And anyways, then what you'd really want at this point to not have, you don't want to render right here all of your children. You'd really want to render it like right now. You'd really want to then say like, my element, okay, like render, start, like go. And now that's rendered, okay, rendered synchronously. Now is the time to like, because now it's gonna have all of its children and blah, 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 blah. Now is the time to do, actually append the element. So this is kind of a problem that custom elements, they don't even really support a nice like separation of you're getting all of a time to get all of your data and then render your view. Like component kind of supports that. It gets all of its data ready, then it renders its view. There's no way that I can think of that's like, you'd almost want a before insertion. Like that's what you'd really want is a callback, like right before you're about to be inserted, okay, now go render all of your elements because you're about to be inserted. Then do the insertion. That would be ideally, I'm surprised, like I should almost like ask back to have something like that because you'd want your full DOM. You don't want to render it after. That's for
why
sure.
not? I don't understand why you don't want to render after. I don't get that. I see that. Huh?
The same div problem. You don't want to be changing after you append. You don't want to then render after because and you're going to insert a whole bunch of elements.
You're going to insert a fragment, one fragment. So there's going to be two insertions. There's going to be your element be inserted into a body, and then you insert a fragment.
That's true versus just one insert.
Okay.
Okay. So it's double. You're right. It's not. I guess maybe I'm over. It doubles the amount of insertion, which isn't great, but maybe that's fine.
And I bet I highly doubt it causes an extra paint or anything.
It would. Well, I mean, it definitely would if you were doing it with like divs. It might. Maybe they've got some dark magic that prevents it. But anytime you touch the DOM, it recalculates a lot of. Well, it depends on how well written the browser is, but it has to recalculate a bunch of like dimensional stuff, and it has to redraw. If you do a div, it will actually put that div out every time. Like it will.
Yeah, so I think
everything.
I think that's another reason to use, because the binding problem cannot be fixed. That's absolutely cannot be fixed.
What
so
binding?
the new view, we can't pass like all the data into a constructor at all because it can happen anytime. So that's not fixable. So maybe the solution is actually just we should not render immediately in connected. We should render in a RAF or something.
Yeah. I don't know. All right, it's a complex. Yeah, it's a complex problem.
Cool. Kevin, you're gonna create an issue for this, right? Okay, cool.
Right, yeah, I'm gonna do some testing. I'll submit an issue.
Yeah, awesome, thanks. Cool, anyone have anything before we go? Nope, okay, cool.
I just want to say that I really like Kevin's deer shirt. That's really cool. Or it's a moose. What is it?
It's a moose.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool.
He's a Mountie, I think.
Yeah.
All right, everyone who's watching on YouTube, either the live stream or afterwards, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. See you guys later.